The Wyoming winter of 1884 arrived with the fury of a wounded animal, howling through the mountain passes and burying the frontier in white silence. In a weathered cabin that leaned against the wind like a tired old man, Elias Hartwell sat by a dying fire, his injured legs stretched before him, throbbing with each beat of his heart. He hadn't meant to send for a bride. The letter had been written in a moment of desperation, when the pain in his leg met the deeper ache in his chest, the one that never left. Not since the fire took everything 2 years ago. His friend Samuel from town had suggested it, pushing the advertisement across the saloon table with rough kindness. "You need help, Eli. Can't survive another winter alone up there." Now, staring at the frost creeping across the window pane, Elias regretted his weakness. What woman would want this life? What woman would want him? Scarred, broken, with nothing to offer but a drafty cabin and memories that woke him screaming in the night. 300 miles southeast. Clara Whitmore folded the letter with careful hands, though they trembled slightly. The advertisement had been simple. Rancher seeks capable woman for household duties. Marriage arrangement. Wyoming territory. But Samuel's accompanying note had been more honest. The man needs care more than a wife. Lost everything in a fire. Good man, but wounded deep. Clara touched the faded bruise on her wrist, hidden beneath her sleeve. Her late husband had left her with more than just bruises. He'd left her with the knowledge that she could endure anything. Wyoming couldn't be worse than what she'd already survived. And the letter promised what she needed most: distance from the pitying looks, the whispered gossip, the memories that haunted every corner of her small Missouri town. The journey west tested her resolve before she'd even reached her destination. The stagecoach broke an axle 30 miles from the nearest town, forcing passengers to wait in freezing temperatures while repairs were made. Snow began falling in thick curtains, transforming the landscape into an alien world of white. "You're the one heading to Hartwell's place?" the driver asked, eyeing her with concern. "That's another day's ride from Laramie, up in the high country. Storm like this, might be best to wait it out in town." But Clara had learned that waiting rarely improved circumstances. "I'll continue on," she said quietly. In Laramie. She hired a guide, a weathered Arapaho man named Joseph, who knew the mountain trails. He studied her city boots and thin coat with disapproval, but said nothing. Simply handed her a buffalo hide to wrap around her shoulders. "Hartwell lives where even wolves think twice about denning," Joseph said as they set out. "You sure about this, ma'am?" Clara pulled the hide tighter. "I've made my choice." The final approach to Elias's cabin took them through forests so thick with snow-laden pines that noon felt like twilight. When they finally broke through to the small clearing, Clara's first sight of her new home made her breath catch, not from beauty, but from the raw honesty of isolation it represented. The cabin tilted slightly, as if shying away from the wind. Smoke drifted from a chimney that needed repair. A broken fence gate hung on one hinge, and the woodpile looked dangerously low for the season. This wasn't just a home that had seen better days. It was a life slowly surrendering to the wilderness. Joseph helped her unload her single trunk. "You want me to wait?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "Make sure he's what you expected?" "No," Clara said, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Thank you." She waited until Joseph's horse disappeared into the trees before approaching the door. Her knock seemed too loud in the mountain quiet. The door opened slowly, and Clara found herself looking up at a man who seemed carved from the same rough wood as his cabin. Elias Hartwell stood well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered despite an obvious weight loss that made his clothes hang loose. Dark hair fell past his collar, unkempt, and a beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that made her step back, gray as winter sky and holding a wariness that matched her own. He leaned heavily on the doorframe, favoring his right leg. The silence stretched between them until it became almost painful. "You're the woman from Missouri," he said finally. Not a question. "Clara Whitmore," she confirmed, forcing her voice steady. "You're Mr. Hartwell." His gaze traveled from her snow-covered bonnet to her impractical boots. and his frown deepened. This was a mistake. The words hit her like a physical blow, but Clara had taken worse. She lifted her chin. "Perhaps, but I've come 300 miles in a snowstorm. Might I at least warm myself by your fire before you send me back?" Something flickered in those gray eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or a grudging respect. He stepped back, gesturing her inside. The cabin's interior matched its exterior, functional but neglected. A single room served multiple purposes, with a bed in one corner, a table and 2 chairs near the fireplace, and shelves holding meager supplies. Everything spoke of a man who'd stopped caring about comfort, who existed rather than lived. Elias limped to the fireplace, adding wood with movements that spoke of constant pain. "There's coffee," he said without looking at her. "Beans and salt pork for supper. I don't keep much else." Clara removed her wet cloak, hanging it on a peg by the door. "I can work with that." He turned then, studying her with those unsettling eyes. "I should be clear, Mrs. Whitmore. I need help through the winter. Someone to cook, keep house, tend to supplies. That's all. Don't expect—" He gestured vaguely, encompassing everything a marriage might entail. "I understand," Clara said quietly. She understood more than he knew. She'd answered his advertisement, not seeking love but escape, not wanting a husband but needing a refuge. "I'm a widow, Mr. Hartwell. I know about marriages of convenience." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Then we understand each other." But as Clara moved to the fireplace to warm her hands, she caught him watching her with something that wasn't quite indifference, and when their eyes met across the small space, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not attraction, exactly, but a recognition. Here was another soul who'd been broken by life, who'd learned to endure rather than hope. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending snow swirling past the frosted glass. The cabin creaked and groaned, but held firm, much like its occupants. Clara thought, damaged but still standing. "I'll show you where things are," Elias said, his voice gruff. "The larder, the water barrel, the wood store. There's a small room off the back, used to be for storage, but I cleared it. You can sleep there." Clara nodded, following as he gave a terse tour of the cramped space. She noticed how he gripped furniture edges when walking, how sweat beaded his forehead despite the cold. Whatever injury plagued his leg was worse than he let on. "How long have you been alone here?" she asked as he showed her the meager food supplies. "2 winters. His jaw tightened. Managed fine enough, looking at the nearly empty larder and his obvious pain. Clara doubted that, but she'd learned when to hold her tongue. That first evening passed in awkward silence. Clara prepared a simple meal, noting how Elias barely touched his food despite looking half-starved. She tidied the main room while he sat by the fire, his injured leg elevated, pretending to read a week-old newspaper. When darkness fell completely, she retreated to the small back room. It held only a narrow cot and a washstand, but it was private. Clara sat on the thin mattress, finally allowing herself to feel the exhaustion of the journey and the uncertainty of what she'd done. Through the thin wall, she heard Elias moving about, the scrape of his chair, the pop of logs in the fireplace. Then, later, the sound that made her press her hand to her mouth, a man crying out in his sleep, calling a name, "Mary, no, Mary." Clara lay still, remembering her own nightmares, her own names called out in the dark. She pulled the single blanket higher and closed her eyes, listening to the wind and the stranger who was now, technically, her husband. In the morning, she'd begin the work of survival. But tonight, she simply existed in this space between her old life and whatever came next, suspended like the snow falling endlessly outside, not quite touching ground, not quite reaching heaven. The rhythm of winter days settled over the cabin like a heavy quilt. Clara rose before dawn, stoking the fire that had died to embers overnight, heating water for coffee that tasted of chicory and survival. Elias would emerge from his corner, moving stiffly, his face a mask of stoicism that couldn't quite hide the pain etched in the lines around his eyes. They moved around each other like wary animals sharing a den. Clara learned his patterns, how he favored his right leg in the mornings, how he'd grip the table edge when the pain spiked, how he'd disappear outside for hours despite the cold, returning with firewood and frost in his beard, trembling from more than just the temperature. The food stores were worse than she'd initially thought. Clara took inventory with growing concern. A half-empty barrel of flour, some salt pork, dried beans, a few withered potatoes, and precious little else. At this rate, they'd be eating boot leather by March. "I can trap," Elias said when she mentioned it, his tone defensive. "Been doing it 2 winters now." But when he tried to head out the next morning, his leg buckled on the porch steps. Clara watched from the window as he pulled himself up, face white with pain and frustration. He made it only to the edge of the clearing before turning back. That night, the fever started. Clara woke to the sound of violent shivering from the main room. She found Elias curled on his side, the blankets kicked off, his skin burning beneath her tentative touch. "Just the leg," he muttered through chattering teeth. "Gets infected sometimes. It'll pass." But as the hours wore on, his condition worsened. The old burn scars on his chest, which Clara glimpsed when changing his sweat-soaked shirt, were angry red. The newer wound on his leg, a jagged line that spoke of accident or violence, wept through the crude bandages. Clara had nursed her late husband through various ailments, though he'd usually repaid her care with harsh words or worse. This was different. Elias fought her help with the desperation of a man unaccustomed to kindness. "Don't need," he gasped, trying to push away the cup of willow bark tea she'd brewed. "Drink," she said firmly, supporting his head. "Unless you plan to die and leave me alone in this wilderness with your corpse." His fevered eyes focused on her with surprise. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. "Practical woman. I've had to be." For 3 days and nights, Clara barely left his side. She bathed his fever with snow-cooled cloths, changed his bandages, forced broth between his cracked lips. She learned the geography of his scars, the old burns that swept across his chest and left arm, the newer wounds that spoke of a hard life made harder by loss. In his delirium, he revealed more than he ever would have conscious. "Mary," he called out, reaching for something only he could see. "Get the children. The smoke. I can't find Jacob in the smoke." Clara held his hand through the worst of it, her heart aching for losses she was beginning to understand. A wife named Mary, a son named Jacob, a fire that had taken everything and left him with scars inside and out. On the 3rd night, as wind howled like grieving women around the cabin, Elias's fever broke. Clara had dozed off in the chair beside his bed, his hand still clasped in hers. She woke to find him watching her, his gray eyes clear for the first time in days. They stared at each other in the flickering firelight, both acutely aware of the intimacy of their position. Clara knew she should pull her hand away, return to proper distance. Instead, she asked quietly, "How do you feel?" "Like I've been dragged behind a horse through a cactus patch," he said, his voice rough, then softer. "You stayed." "Where would I go?" she asked, attempting lightness, but the question hung between them, weighted with truth. Where indeed? Back to Missouri and the whispers about the barren widow? To another frontier town where she'd be just as alone? Elias turned his hand, properly holding hers now instead of merely allowing the touch. "Thank you," he said simply. Clara felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. When had anyone last thanked her for anything? "You're welcome," she managed. The moment stretched, fragile as spun glass. Then Elias seemed to remember himself, gently extracting his hand. "You should rest in your own bed." Clara stood, her back protesting from 3 nights in the chair. As she moved toward her small room, his voice stopped her. "Clara." She turned. He was looking at the ceiling, not at her. "My wife, Mary. She used to hum while she worked. Hymns, mostly. You." You hum too, different songs, but—" He didn't finish, but Clara understood. She was a ghost of memory, a shadow of what he'd lost. "I'll try to be quiet," she offered. "No." The word came quick, almost panicked. "No, it's a good sound. Makes the cabin feel less empty." Clara finished. He nodded, still not looking at her. That night, Clara lay in her narrow bed thinking about the weight of emptiness, how it could fill a space more thoroughly than any crowd. She thought about the photograph she'd glimpsed on Elias's shelf, a woman with kind eyes and a small boy with his father's serious expression. She thought about her own losses, the children she'd never have, the bruises faded but not forgotten. In the morning, she found Elias attempting to dress himself, struggling with his boots. Without asking, she knelt and helped, her hands gentle on his still swollen leg. "The storm's passed," he said, looking everywhere but at her. "Need to check the trap lines." "You need to heal," Clara countered. "The traps can wait." His jaw tightened. "Can't afford to wait. We need meat." Clara recognized the pride in his voice, the need to provide, to be useful. She'd seen it in her father, her brothers, her late husband, though the latter had twisted it into something cruel. "Then teach me," she said suddenly. "Show me where the traps are, how to check them. I can do it while you recover." Elias stared at her. "It's dangerous. Wolves, weather, getting lost. I'm here, aren't I?" Clara stood, brushing off her skirts. "That should tell you I'm not afraid of danger." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps even admiration. "You're not what I expected. Clara Whitmore, nor you. Elias Hartwell," she replied. That afternoon, bundled against the cold, Clara followed Elias's careful directions to the nearest trap line. The forest was a cathedral of snow and silence, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. She found 2 rabbits, which she freed and reset the traps as he'd shown her, returning with her small triumph. She found Elias had managed to repair a broken chair while she was gone. They prepared the rabbits together, working in companionable silence that felt different from their earlier wariness. As they ate the simple stew, Elias cleared his throat. "That trunk of yours, is that all you brought?" Clara nodded. "All I owned that mattered. There's a storage space in the loft," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Some things up there. Mary's things, clothes and such. They're no use sitting up there, if you need them." The offer cost him. Clara could see it in the tension of his shoulders. "That's kind of you," she said carefully. Perhaps you could tell me about her sometime. And Jacob." Elias's hand stilled on his spoon. For a moment, she thought she'd overstepped. Then he nodded once, curtly. "Sometime," he agreed. That night, as Clara explored the loft by lamplight, she found more than clothes. She found a life interrupted. A child's wooden horse, a woman's Sunday bonnet, a Bible with pressed flowers between its pages, and wrapped in oilcloth, a man's wedding suit, carefully preserved. She touched the fine wool, thinking of the man downstairs who'd saved these remnants of love while living like he deserved nothing. Through the floor, she could hear him moving about, the scrape of his chair, the familiar sounds of a house holding 2 souls instead of one. Clara selected only what she truly needed: a warm cloak, sturdy boots, wool stockings. The rest she carefully rewrapped, understanding that some ghosts needed tending, not exorcising. When she descended the ladder, Elias was standing by the window, looking out at the moon-silvered snow. "Storm coming," he said without turning. "Can smell it." Clara moved to stand beside him, not quite touching but close enough to feel his warmth. "We'd better prepare." "We," he repeated softly, as if tasting the word. Outside, the wind began to pick up, rattling the windows with icy fingers. But inside, for the first time since she'd arrived, the cabin felt almost warm. Not quite a home, not yet, but no longer just a place to endure winter. It was a beginning. The storm Elias had smelled on the wind arrived with a vengeance. sealing them inside the cabin for 2 days and nights. Snow piled against the door until it became impossible to open, and the wind screamed through every gap in the logs like a creature trying to claw its way inside. They moved the necessities into the main room near the fireplace: water barrel, food supplies, extra wood. The temperature dropped so severely that ice formed on the inside walls, and Clara's small back room became uninhabitable. "You'll have to sleep out here," Elias said gruffly, dragging her thin mattress near the fire. He positioned it carefully, as far from his own bed as the small space would allow. But propriety seemed a foolish concern when survival demanded they huddle near the only heat source. They sat close to the flames, shoulders almost touching, sharing the meager warmth and trying not to acknowledge how natural it felt. The first night of the storm, they barely spoke. Clara mended clothes by firelight while Elias sharpened tools, each pretending the forced intimacy didn't affect them. But when the wind gusted particularly hard, shaking the entire cabin, Clara couldn't suppress a flinch. "It'll hold," Elias said quietly. "Built it myself after—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "After the fire?" Clara prompted gently. He nodded, staring into the flames. Nothing left of the old place, just the stone foundation and, his hand stilled on the whetstone, and 2 graves on the hill. Clara set down her sewing. The only sounds were the fire's crackle and the wind's howl. She wanted to offer comfort, but knew from experience that sometimes silence was kinder than words. "Jacob was 6, Elias continued, surprising her, always following me around, wanting to help with everything. "Let me, Papa," he'd say. "I'm big enough." His voice caught. "He was in the loft when the fire started. Mary went up for him. The stairs collapsed." Clara's breath hitched. Without thinking, she reached across the small space between them, covering his scarred hand with hers. "I tried," he whispered. "God knows I tried. But the heat, the smoke, I couldn't reach them. Could hear them, but couldn't." He turned his hand, gripping hers like a lifeline. "Sometimes I still hear them. I'm sorry." Clara breathed, knowing how inadequate the words were. "The burns were bad enough the doc said I'd likely die." Elias continued, his voice flat now. "Wished I had, those first months. Then the leg got injured in a rock slide, trying to clear what was left of the house. Seemed fitting. Broken body for a broken man." They sat in silence, hands clasped, as the storm raged outside. Clara thought of her own ghosts. The children she'd lost before they could draw breath. Her husband's rage when the doctor confirmed she'd never carry to term. "My husband died in a saloon fight," she said quietly. "Another man's knife, arguing over cards. The whole town knew what he was, how he treated me, but when he died, they all said what a tragedy it was. How sorry they were for my loss." She laughed bitterly. "I wasn't sorry. Is that wicked of me?" Elias turned to look at her fully, their faces close in the firelight. "No," he said firmly. "That's honest." The wind howled louder, and something crashed against the cabin wall, a tree branch, perhaps. Without thought, Clara shifted closer, and Elias's arm came around her shoulders, steadying her. They froze, acutely aware of the line they were crossing. Clara could feel his heartbeat, rapid as her own. She should pull away, return to safe distance. Instead, she let herself lean into his warmth, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder. "This is improper," she whispered. "Yes," he agreed. But his arm tightened around her. They stayed that way as the storm raged, 2 souls finding shelter in each other. When Clara finally dozed, she dreamed not of her cold marriage bed but of warmth and safety. She woke to find herself alone on her mattress, covered with an extra blanket. Elias was feeding the fire, his movements careful and quiet. When he sensed her watching, he glanced back. "Storm's easing," he said, voice carefully neutral. "Should be able to dig out by afternoon." Clara sat up, keenly feeling the loss of his warmth. "Elias, about last night." "Nothing happened," he said quickly. "You were cold. Storm was bad. Nothing more to it." But the way he avoided her eyes said otherwise. The second day dawned with weak sunlight filtering through the frost-covered windows. They worked together to clear the door, Elias's leg clearly paining him, though he refused to acknowledge it. The world outside was transformed. Snowdrifts reached the cabin's eaves, and trees bowed under white weight. "We'll need more wood," Elias said, surveying the damage. "And to check the animals' shelter." They had only a few chickens and an old mule, but Clara had learned their survival might depend on these meager livestock. She helped him forge a path to the lean-to, where they found the animals huddled but alive. Working side by side, they fell into a rhythm. Clara noticed how Elias no longer stiffened when she came close, how he'd steady her with a hand on her elbow when she slipped on ice. Small touches, but each one felt significant. That evening, exhausted from the day's labor, they again sat by the fire. Clara had made a simple meal from their dwindling supplies, and they ate in companionable silence. "You're not what I expected when I sent that letter," Elias said suddenly. Clara looked up from her plate. "What did you expect?" "Someone older, maybe desperate, coming here because she had no other choice." "I'm desperate," Clara said quietly. "And I did have no other choice? Does that disappoint you?" "No." He set down his fork, meeting her eyes. "Because I was desperate too. Am desperate. But you," he struggled for words. "You make it seem less like desperation and more like choosing." "We're all choosing, every day." Clara replied, "Choosing to survive, to continue, to hope or not hope. I chose to come here. And each morning, I choose to stay, even after seeing what life here is, what I am." Clara stood, moving to add wood to the fire. "What I see is a man who saved his wife's wedding dress and his son's toy horse, who built a new home with injured hands and a broken heart, who sent for help even though accepting it goes against every instinct." She turned to face him. "That's not weakness, Elias, that's courage." He stared at her, something raw and vulnerable in his expression. "Clara." She waited, heart pounding. But he seemed unable to continue. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Finally, Clara moved back to her seat. "The storm brought down some branches near the east side. We should clear them tomorrow before the next snow." Elias blinked, accepting her retreat to safer ground. "Yes, and check the root cellar. Make sure nothing froze." But as they discussed practical matters, their eyes kept meeting across the small space. And when it came time to sleep, Clara was acutely aware of every sound he made, every shift of his weight on his mattress just feet from hers. In the darkness, his voice came soft. "Clara, thank you for what you said." She smiled, though he couldn't see it. "You're welcome, Elias." The wind had calmed outside, leaving a profound silence. In that quiet, Clara heard him shift, perhaps turning to face her direction. "My wife," he said slowly. "Mary would have liked you. She always said I needed someone who'd speak plain truth to me." Clara's throat tightened. "She sounds wise." She was. A pause. "You remind me of her sometimes, not in looks or manner, but in strength, the way you just get on with things, no matter how hard." It should have hurt, being compared to a dead woman. But Clara heard what he wasn't quite saying, that she was becoming her own presence in his life, not just a ghost of what he'd lost. "Rest now," she whispered. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." "Yes," he agreed. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Elias." But neither slept for a long while, each acutely aware of the other's breathing. The shrinking distance between them measured not in feet, but in the walls around their hearts, slowly crumbling like snow in spring's first thaw. The stranger arrived on a gray afternoon when the sky threatened more snow. Clara saw him first through the kitchen window, a man in a black coat riding a horse too fine for these parts, picking his way carefully through the snow-covered trail. "Someone's coming," she called to Elias, who was repairing harnesses by the fire. He stood quickly, wincing at the movement, and reached for the rifle by the door. "Stay inside," he ordered. But Clara had already grabbed her shawl. The rider stopped a respectful distance from the cabin, hands visible. "Elias Hartwell," he called out. "Name's Theodore Blackwood. From the bank in Laramie." Elias's face hardened. "What do you want?" "Blackwood. To talk business. Might we step inside? It's a long, cold ride from town." Clara saw Elias's jaw work, fighting between frontier hospitality and obvious reluctance. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Coffee's hot," he said, which passed for a welcome. "Inside." Blackwood removed his fine coat, revealing a city suit unsuited to the territory. He was younger than Clara expected, with shrewd eyes that catalogued everything: the meager supplies, the patched furniture. Clara herself. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, tipping his hat. I hadn't heard Elias had remarried. "Recent development," Elias said shortly. "State your business." Blackwood accepted the coffee Clara offered, sipping it before speaking. "I'll be direct. The bank holds a note on this land. As you know, you're behind on payments." "The fire set me back," Elias said. "You know that too." "Indeed. Which is why we've been patient. But patience has limits." Blackwood set down his cup. "I'm here to make you an offer. Sell the land to me. I have Eastern buyers interested in ranching, and you'll have enough to start fresh elsewhere. Debt cleared. No. Be reasonable, Hartwell. You can barely work with that leg. Another bad winter, and I said no." Blackwood's eyes flicked to Clara. "Perhaps your wife has an opinion? Surely she'd prefer town life to this." Clara moved to stand beside Elias. "My husband's answer is mine as well." Something passed between the two men, a tension that spoke of history Clara didn't know. Blackwood stood, donning his coat. "The offer stands until spring. After that," he shrugged, "the bank will take what it's owed, one way or another." After he left, Elias slumped in his chair, the strength that had sustained him during the confrontation draining away. "How much?" Clara asked quietly. $200. Might as well be 2,000. Clara's mind raced. Her small savings, sewn into her corset, amounted to $30. "The furs from trapping—" "Won't be enough. Never is." He rubbed his face. "Should have told you before you came. You hitched yourself to a sinking ship. Stop!" Clara's voice came out sharper than intended. "I'm not some fragile flower who needs protecting from hard truth. We're partners in this, aren't we?" He looked up at her, surprised. "Are we?" Instead of answering, Clara moved to the window where Blackwood's tracks still marked the snow. "There's always a way. We have until spring. We'll find it." That night, she noticed Elias favoring his leg more than usual. The confrontation had cost him. As they prepared for bed, he stumbled, catching himself on the table edge with a suppressed groan. "Let me look at it." Clara said, "It's fine. It's not fine, and we both know it." She faced him, hands on hips. "Must you be so stubborn? Must you be so persistent?" They glared at each other. Then Elias's mouth twitched. "You're a formidable woman, Clara Whitmore." "Hartwell," she corrected. "Clara Hartwell. If we're keeping up appearances for bankers." Something flickered in his eyes. Slowly, he sat and rolled up his trouser leg, revealing the angry wound that refused to properly heal. Clara knelt beside him, examining it with gentle fingers. "This needs proper cleaning, and you need willow bark tea for the inflammation." "Clara," his voice was rough. "You don't have to—" "Hush." She fetched warm water and clean cloths. "Let me take care of you. It's what I'm here for, isn't it?" As she worked, Elias watched her face. "Is that all you're here for?" Her hands stilled. The question hung between them, weighted with meaning. Clara forced herself to continue cleaning the wound. "What else would I be here for?" "I don't know," he admitted. "That's what frightens me." She looked up then, finding his gray eyes dark with something that made her breath catch. Without thinking, she reached up, touching the scar that ran along his jaw. He caught her hand, pressing it against his face. "Clara," he whispered. "We shouldn't—" "No," she agreed. "We shouldn't." But neither moved. The fire crackled. Shadows dancing on the walls. Outside. Wind rattled the windows. Inside. Two lonely souls leaned toward each other like flowers seeking sun. Elias turned his face, pressing his lips to her palm. Such a simple gesture, but Clara felt it through her entire body. She swayed toward him, and he caught her shoulders, steadying her. For a moment, they were frozen there, her kneeling between his knees, his hands on her shoulders, faces inches apart. "If I kiss you," he said roughly, "everything changes. Everything's already changed." Clara breathed. He made a sound, part groan, part surrender, and pulled her up to meet him. Their lips met, tentative at first, then with growing hunger. Clara's hands tangled in his hair, and he pulled her closer, desperate, as if trying to fill all the empty spaces inside with her warmth. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Elias pressed his forehead to hers. "I'm no good for you," he whispered. "Broken land, broken body, broken man." "We're all broken," Clara replied, cupping his face. "Maybe that's why we fit." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Clara felt herself melting, falling, surrendering to something she'd never felt with her late husband. Desire born not from duty but from choice. But then Elias stiffened, pulling back. His eyes were tortured. "No, I can't. Mary!" The name fell between them like cold water. Clara stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "Of course," she said quietly. "I understand. Do you?" His voice was anguished. "Because I don't. You're here, alive, warm, and I want. God help me, I want. But wanting feels like betrayal." Clara moved to the window, giving them both space. "She loved you," she said finally. "Mary, she loved you enough to run into fire for your child. Do you think that love would want you to die slowly in this cabin, alone and grieving forever?" "Don't!" His voice was sharp. "Don't presume to speak for her." "I'm not." Clara turned to face him. "I'm speaking for me. I've been dead inside for years. Elias, my husband killed something in me with his fists and his words. Coming here, meeting you, I'm starting to feel alive again. But if you can't see me as anything but her shadow, you're not her shadow." The words burst from him. "That's what terrifies me. You're you, and I see you too clearly. Want you too much." They stared at each other across the small space, both trembling with emotion and unspent desire. "I should go to bed," Clara said finally. "Alone," she added when he shifted as if to speak. That night, she lay on her narrow mattress, touching her lips where he'd kissed her, feeling the phantom warmth of his hands. Through the wall, she could hear him moving restlessly, and she wondered if he too was reliving those moments, caught between guilt and longing. In the morning, they were carefully polite, moving around each other with exaggerated caution. But when their fingers brushed passing the water bucket, when their eyes met across the breakfast table, the air crackled with awareness. Clara threw herself into work, starting seeds in boxes by the window despite the cold, planning for a spring garden that might never be theirs. Elias watched her, saying nothing, but she felt his gaze like a touch. That afternoon, while he was checking the animals, Clara climbed to the loft. Among Mary's things, she found a journal. She shouldn't read it, knew it was a violation, but she needed to understand the woman whose memory stood between them. Mary's writing was practical, recording daily life, but love shone through every mention of Elias and Jacob. The final entry, dated just days before the fire, made Clara's eyes blur. Working too hard again. Worries about providing, though I tell him we have all we need, each other. Made his favorite stew. Simple pleasures are the greatest gifts. Clara closed the journal, tears on her cheeks. Mary had loved Elias not for what he could provide, but for who he was. Could Clara make him understand that she felt the same? When Elias returned, she was composed again, stirring soup on the stove. He paused in the doorway, watching her. "You're humming again," he said softly. She hadn't realized. "Does it bother you?" "No." He moved closer, close enough that she could smell snow and pine on his clothes. "Makes the place feel like home." Their eyes met and held. Clara saw the struggle in his face. Duty, warring with desire, past with present. She wanted to reach for him, but knew he had to choose his own path forward. "Supper's ready," she said instead. But as they ate in silence, charged with unspoken words, Clara felt something shifting between them. Slow but inexorable as spring coming to the mountains. The question was whether it would arrive in time to save them, or too late, leaving only regret among the ruins of what might have been. The accident happened on a crystalline morning when the sun made the snow-covered world gleam like scattered diamonds. Clara had gone to fetch firewood from the pile behind the cabin, humming as she worked. The tune died on her lips as her boot found ice beneath the snow. She fell hard, her ankle twisting at an unnatural angle, pain shooting up her leg like lightning. Her cry pierced the morning quiet, sending birds erupting from the nearby pines. Elias burst from the cabin, rifle in hand, expecting wolves or worse. When he saw Clara crumpled in the snow, her face white with pain, he dropped the gun and ran, or tried to. His bad leg buckled, sending him stumbling, but he caught himself and pressed on. "Don't move," he commanded, dropping to his knees beside her. His hands, so often hesitant to touch her, now moved with sure purpose, checking for breaks. "My ankle," Clara gasped. I think it's twisted. Can you put your arm around my neck?" When she nodded, he slipped one arm beneath her knees, the other around her shoulders. "This will hurt." She bit back a cry as he lifted her. For a man who favored his leg, his upper body strength was formidable. He carried her as if she weighed nothing, though she could see the strain in his face, the way his jaw clenched with each step. Inside, he settled her on his own bed, closer to the fire than hers. His hands were gentle as he unlaced her boot, easing it off along with her stocking. Clara flushed at the intimacy, even through the pain. "Not broken," he said after careful examination, "but badly sprained. It needs cold." He packed snow in a cloth, pressing it to her ankle. Clara hissed at the shock, and he steadied her with a hand on her calf. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I know it hurts. I've had worse," she managed, thinking of other pain, other hands that weren't gentle. Something flickered in his eyes, understanding, perhaps, and anger at wounds he couldn't see. "Still," he said softly, "I don't like seeing you hurt." As the day wore on, their roles reversed completely. Elias tended to her with a competence that spoke of experience, adjusting pillows, bringing tea, preparing simple meals. He fashioned a crutch from a sturdy branch, wrapped her ankle with torn strips of cloth. "You're good at this," Clara observed, watching him work. "Had practice," he said, not looking up. "Mary sprained her wrist once. First year we were married. I was so scared I'd hurt her worse. But she talked me through it." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She was patient with me." "You loved her very much." "Yes." He met her eyes. "Does that bother you?" Clara considered. "No, it tells me what kind of man you are. The kind who loves deeply, completely." She paused. "That's rare. And dangerous," he said quietly. "Loving like that, losing like that, it nearly killed me." But it didn't. Clara reached out, catching his hand. "You're still here, still capable of gentleness, of care. That's not weakness, Elias, that's strength." He stared at their joined hands, his thumb moving almost unconsciously over her knuckles. "When I saw you fall, He swallowed hard. "I couldn't lose anyone else, not you." The admission hung between them, raw and revealing. Clara tightened her grip on his hand. "You won't lose me. I'm tougher than I look." "I'm beginning to see that." As evening fell, the enforced inactivity created a different kind of intimacy. Elias sat on the bed's edge, reading aloud from one of his few books while Clara rested. His voice, deep and measured, wrapped around her like warmth. "You should sleep," he said eventually, setting the book aside. "Where will you sleep?" Clara asked. "I've taken your bed. Chair's fine for one night." "Elias." She caught his sleeve as he stood. "This bed is big enough for two, and it's cold." He went very still. "Clara, what are you asking?" "I'm asking you to be practical," she said, though her heart raced. "We've shared this cabin for weeks. Surely we can share a bed for warmth without—" "Without?" His voice was rough. "Without it meaning more than it should." He laughed, short and harsh. "Nothing between us means what it should anymore." But when full dark came and the temperature plummeted, he relented, moving carefully. He lay down beside her, fully clothed, on top of the blankets while she lay beneath them. The space between them felt charged, electric. "Tell me about before," Clara said into the darkness. "Before the fire. What was life like?" For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, quietly, he began to speak. He told her about building the first cabin with his own hands, about Mary arriving as a mail-order bride just as Clara had, scared but determined, about Jacob's birth during a spring storm, how the baby's cry had been the sweetest sound he'd ever heard. "We weren't rich," he said, "but we were happy, had everything we needed." "You'll have that again," Clara whispered. "How can you be sure?" She turned carefully, mindful of her ankle, until she faced him in the darkness. "Because you're already building it. Every day you survive, every kindness you show despite the pain, you're rebuilding." "I'm tired of building alone," he admitted, the words seeming pulled from deep within. "You're not alone." Clara found his hand between them, intertwining their fingers. "Not anymore." They lay in silence, hands clasped, listening to each other breathe. Clara dozed, waking sometime later to find herself pressed against Elias's side, his arm around her. She should move away, but his warmth was too welcome, the steady beat of his heart too comforting. She felt him wake, his body tensing as he realized their position, but he didn't pull away. Instead, his arm tightened slightly, holding her closer. "Clara," his voice was barely audible. I'm glad you're here." She smiled against his shoulder. "So am I." Dawn came too soon, bringing with it a return to careful distance, but something fundamental had shifted. As Elias helped her hobble around the cabin, as they worked together preparing breakfast, the touches lingered. A hand on her waist to steady her, fingers brushing as they passed items. Each contact sent warmth through Clara that had nothing to do with the fire. By afternoon, she could put some weight on her ankle. Elias fashioned a better wrap, his fingers careful on her skin. "Thank you," she said softly, "for taking care of me." He looked up at her, his gray eyes intense. "It's what you do for people you—" He stopped, looking away. "For partners." But Clara heard what he hadn't said, saw it in the trembling of his hands as he finished the wrap. The word he couldn't speak hung between them, fragile as frost and just as likely to vanish in the heat of day. That night, without discussion, they again shared the bed. This time, when Clara woke pressed against him, she didn't pretend to sleep. Neither did he. "I dream about them less," he said quietly. "Since you came. Is that bad?" "I don't know. It feels like forgetting." Clara rose on her elbow, looking down at his face in the dim light. "Remembering them with love instead of only pain isn't forgetting. It's healing." He reached up, touching her face with fingers that shook slightly. "What are you doing to me?" "Clara Hartwell, bringing you back to life," she whispered. "Just as you're doing for me." He pulled her down then, their lips meeting in a kiss that was different from the first, deeper, more certain, full of promise rather than fear. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, Elias pressed his forehead to hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Not just tonight. Stay." Clara's eyes burned with unshed tears. "I'm not going anywhere." They settled back together, her head on his chest, his arms around her. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside their small cabin, warmth bloomed, not just from the fire, but from two hearts learning to beat as one, two souls choosing hope over fear, love over loss. "Your ankle will be better in a few days," Elias said drowsily. Shame, really." She felt his chest rumble with quiet laughter. Why's that? I like being taken care of, and I like taking care of you. His arms tightened around her. We'll have to keep taking care of each other then. Ankle or no ankle. I'd like that, Clara whispered. As sleep claimed them, the cabin no longer felt like a refuge from life, but a foundation for it, sturdy walls built by love and loss, sheltering hearts brave enough to try again. The fever came upon Clara like a thief in the night. 3 weeks after her ankle had healed. One moment she was stirring the rabbit stew for supper. The next, she was gripping the table edge as the room spun wildly around her. Just tired, she murmured when Elias looked up from mending a harness. But when she tried to ladle the stew, the pot seemed impossibly heavy, and the spoon clattered from her trembling hand. Elias was beside her in an instant, his hand on her forehead. You're burning up. I'm fine, Clara insisted. Even as her knees buckled, Elias caught her, sweeping her into his arms as he had the day she fell. Stubborn woman, he muttered, carrying her to bed. Always telling me to accept help, but you won't take your own advice. The next days blurred together in a haze of fever dreams and bone-deep chills. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes aware of Elias's presence, cool cloths on her forehead, spoonfuls of broth coaxed between her lips, his voice talking steadily as if to anchor her to the world. In her delirium, past and present tangled. Sometimes she was back in Missouri, cowering from her husband's raised fist. She must have cried out because Elias's voice would come, firm and real. You're safe, Clara. No one will hurt you here. Other times she dreamed of children, the babies she'd lost, playing in a meadow of impossible green. She reached for them, weeping, and felt Elias's hand grip hers. I'm here, he whispered. Hold on to me. On the third night, when her fever spiked dangerously high, she heard him praying, rusty words from a man who'd lost his faith. Not her, he pleaded. Please, God, not her too. Take me instead if you must, but not Clara. She deserves better than this, better than me. But I need her. God help me. I need her. Clara wanted to tell him she wasn't going anywhere, but the words wouldn't come. She could only squeeze his hand weakly, trying to convey what her voice couldn't. When the fever finally broke, she woke to weak sunlight streaming through the window, and Elias slumped in the chair beside the bed, her hands still clasped in both of his. He looked haggard, hollow-eyed, unshaven, his clothes wrinkled from days without changing. Elias, she whispered. His head snapped up, eyes widening with relief so profound it took her breath away. Clara, thank God. He pressed her hand to his lips, and she felt moisture on his cheeks. Don't ever scare me like that again. How long? 4 days. His voice was rough. 4 very long days. Clara noticed the cup of willow bark tea on the bedside table, the basin of water, the careful arrangement of everything within his reach. You never left. Where would I go? The echo of her own words from weeks ago made her smile weakly. You're my wife, in sickness and health. Remember? Just a marriage of convenience, she reminded him, though the words felt false now. Nothing about you has ever been convenient. Clara Hartwell. But his eyes were warm, his thumb stroking over her knuckles. Are you hungry? Thirsty? Thirsty. He helped her sit up, supporting her while she sipped water. Clara was shocked by how weak she felt, how even this simple action exhausted her. What happened? She asked. I felt fine. Then suddenly, winter fever. Doc calls it that when he doesn't know what else to say. Elias's jaw tightened. I should have ridden for him, but I couldn't leave you. Couldn't risk... Shh. Clara touched his face, feeling the rasp of stubble. You did everything right. I'm here. Barely. The word came out cracked. You were so still, so pale. I thought... He broke off, shaking his head. Over the next days, Clara recovered slowly under Elias's vigilant care. He was tender in ways that would have seemed impossible when she first arrived, brushing her hair, reading to her, coaxing her to eat when her appetite fled. But she noticed how he kept touching her, as if reassuring himself she was real, A hand on her shoulder, fingers checking her temperature, the briefest caress of her cheek. One evening, as he helped her to the chair by the fire while he changed the bedding, Clara caught his arm. "I heard you praying." He stilled. "I didn't think you were conscious." "God heard you," she said softly. "I'm still here. I haven't prayed since—" He swallowed. "Since I buried them. Figured God and I were done with each other. Maybe he wasn't done with you." Elias knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. "When I thought I might lose you, I realized something." He struggled for words, this man more comfortable with silence. "I've been so afraid of betraying Mary's memory, of replacing what we had, but you were right. You're not replacing anything. You're creating something new." Clara's heart thundered. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm done being afraid." He drew a shaky breath. "I love you, Clara. Not as an echo of the past, not as a convenience. I love you for your strength, your stubbornness, the way you hum when you think I'm not listening. I love you for seeing me as more than my scars and still choosing to stay." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. "Elias, you don't have to say it back," he rushed on. "I know your first marriage was. I know trust doesn't come easy, but I needed you to know. Almost losing you made me realize I couldn't bear having words left unspoken." Clara cupped his face in her hands. "You beautiful, foolish man. I've loved you since the night you held my hand through your fever and called me brave. Maybe before that. Maybe from the moment you tried to send me away to protect me from your pain." He made a sound, half laugh, half sob, and pulled her into a kiss that was desperate and tender and full of promise. When they parted, both were crying. "What do we do now?" Clara whispered. "Now?" Elias stood, lifting her carefully. "Now you get better, and then we figure out how to save this place. Together." "Blackwood's threat?" "We'll face it. I spent so long thinking I had to carry everything alone, but you taught me something. Clara, we're stronger together than apart." As he settled her back in bed, Clara caught his hand. "Stay with me." He smiled, a real smile that transformed his face, showing her the man he must have been before loss carved lines around his eyes. Always. That night, Dr. Brennan finally arrived, summoned by a neighbor who'd noticed the lack of smoke from their chimney for days and worried. He examined Clara thoroughly while Elias hovered anxiously. "She'll recover?" the doctor pronounced. "But she needs rest, good food, and no taxing work for at least 2 weeks." He pulled Elias aside, but Clara heard his lowered words. "That wife of yours is expecting Hartwell. Did you know?" The blood drained from Elias's face. "Expecting?" "About 2 months along. I'd guess the fever was concerning, but the baby seems to have weathered it. Still," the doctor's face grew grave, "she's fragile. Lost babies before, hasn't she? I can see the signs. This pregnancy will be difficult. She needs care, minimal strain. You understand?" After the doctor left, Elias sat on the bed's edge, staring at Clara with a mix of wonder and terror. "A baby," he whispered. "I suspected," Clara admitted. "But I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to hope too soon. I've lost so many—" "No," he gripped her hands. "Not this one. This one will live. Clara, I swear to you. You can't promise that. Watch me." His eyes blazed with determination. "We've both lost enough. This baby, our baby, will know nothing but love and safety. I'll sell the land if I have to. Take Blackwood's offer." "You will not!" Clara's voice was firm despite her weakness. "This is our home, our child's home. We'll find another way." Elias gathered her close, careful of her fragility. "How did I survive so long without you?" "You were waiting," Clara murmured against his chest, "just as I was waiting to live again," as sleep claimed her. Clara felt Elias's hand spread protectively over her still flat stomach. "Hold on, little one," she heard him whisper. "Your mama and I have been through too much to lose you now." Outside, spring was still months away, and Blackwood's threat hung over them like a storm cloud. But inside their small cabin, Hope had taken root as surely as the child within Clara, fragile, precious, and fiercely protected by two souls who'd learned that sometimes the greatest courage was in choosing to love again. The morning Clara decided to leave dawned crisp and clear, spring finally showing its face after the longest winter of their lives. She stood at the window, one hand pressed to her growing belly, watching Elias work outside. He moved carefully, still favoring his leg, but with a purpose that had been absent when she first arrived. The argument from the night before echoed in her mind. "You can't keep treating me like glass," she'd said, frustration boiling over when he'd forbidden her from helping with even the lightest chores. The doctor said to be careful, not to become a prisoner." Clara had turned away, fighting tears. "I've lost 4 babies. Elias, 4. Do you think wrapping me in cotton will change fate?" His face had gone white. "Don't say that. This one is different." "How? How is it different?" The words had poured out, bitter and afraid. "Because we love each other. I loved my lost babies too. Love doesn't protect against God's will." "Then what does?" His voice had cracked. "Tell me what to do. Clara, tell me how to not be terrified every moment of losing you both." She'd seen it then, the depth of his fear, how it was eating him alive. Every time she shifted uncomfortably, every morning when nausea kept her from breakfast, he watched her with haunted eyes. He was living in constant dread, and it was poisoning what should have been their joy. "I can't breathe," she'd whispered. "Your fear is suffocating me." Now, watching him split wood with mechanical precision, Clara made her decision. She couldn't live under the weight of his terror, couldn't bear to see him destroy himself with worry. Better to leave now, before spring progressed and travel became impossible with her condition. Better to spare him the agony of watching her potentially lose another child. She'd go to Cheyenne, where her cousin lived, find work as a seamstress, send word after the baby came, or didn't. Clara packed quietly, taking only what she'd brought and leaving Mary's borrowed clothes carefully folded. She wrote a letter, her hand shaking. "My dearest Elias, your love is the greatest gift I've ever received, but I cannot be the source of such fear for you. You've lost too much already. I won't have you watch me fail again. When this is over, if God grants us mercy, I'll send word. If not, remember me with kindness and find someone who can give you the family you deserve. All my love. Clara." She left while he was checking the trap lines, knowing her courage would fail if she had to see his face. The trek to town was arduous, her body already ungainly with pregnancy. But she made it to the stage depot by afternoon. That's when Blackwood's men found her. Mrs. Hartwell. Blackwood himself emerged from the saloon, his smile cold. "What fortunate timing. I was just about to ride out to your homestead." "Mr. Blackwood." Clara kept her voice steady. "I'm traveling. If you'll excuse me." "Oh, but I can't do that." He nodded to his men, who moved to flank her. "You see, your husband has been remarkably stubborn about my generous offer. Perhaps he needs different motivation." "You can't," Clara started, but rough hands were already guiding her toward the saloon's back room. "I can, actually," Blackwood said conversationally. "Nobody knows you're in town. Your husband's at least an hour away. By the time anyone raises questions, well," he shrugged, "land disputes can be so complicated." They locked her in a storage room, ignoring her protests. Clara heard Blackwood giving orders. "Send word to Hartwell. He has until sunset to sign the deed over. Otherwise, his pretty wife might have an unfortunate accident." Alone in the dim room, Clara sank onto a crate, hand protective over her belly. "I'm sorry, little one," she whispered. "I've made a terrible mistake." Meanwhile, Elias returned to an empty cabin and a letter that sent him to his knees. He read it 3 times, each word a knife to his heart. She'd left him, left because he'd driven her away with his fear, suffocated her with his terror of loss. He might have remained there, paralyzed by despair, if young Tommy Morrison hadn't burst through the door, Mr. Hartwell! They got her! Blackwood's got your missus!" The words snapped Elias from his grief. "What?" "Pa saw them take her into the saloon. Blackwood's man just rode out here. He'll be arriving any minute with terms." Rage, cold and clarifying, swept through Elias. Clara hadn't left him. She'd tried to, yes, but now she was in danger because of him, because of land he'd been too proud to abandon. When Blackwood's messenger arrived, Elias was ready. He took the man's terms, the deed in exchange for Clara, and agreed to meet at sunset. But he also sent Tommy to town with a different message. The sun was sinking toward the mountains when Elias arrived in town. He walked with pronounced difficulty, exaggerating his limp, looking every inch the broken man Blackwood expected. In his hand was the deed to his land. "Wise choice," Blackwood said, emerging from the saloon. "The lady's inside. Sign first." "Let me see her," Elias countered. "Prove she's unharmed." Blackwood nodded to his men. They brought Clara out, pale but defiant. Her eyes widened when she saw Elias. "You shouldn't have come," she said. "The land is dirt and wood." Elias interrupted. "You're my life." "How touching." Blackwood held out his hand. "The deed." Elias stepped forward, then stumbled, crying out as his bad legs seemingly gave way. As Blackwood's men rushed to catch him, chaos erupted. The townsmen Elias had alerted burst from their hiding places. Sheriff Morrison, Tommy's father, led the charge. "Theodore Blackwood, you're under arrest for kidnapping and extortion." The fight was brief but vicious. Blackwood pulled a hidden derringer, aiming for Elias, but Clara threw herself forward, knocking his arm aside. The shot went wide, and then Elias was there, his fist connecting with Blackwood's jaw with all the fury of a man protecting what he loved. When it was over, Blackwood and 2 of his men were in custody. Clara stood shaking in the street until Elias pulled her against him. "You let her," he said roughly. "Were you really going to leave? I couldn't bear being the source of your fear." Clara whispered. "You were dying inside, watching me every moment. And you thought I'd die less with you gone." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes fierce. "Clara, I was afraid because I finally had something to lose again. But you're right, I was letting fear poison us." He cupped her face. "I can't promise not to worry, but I can promise to trust more than I fear, to believe in our future more than I dread our past. Elias, come home," he said simply. "Please." Sheriff Morrison approached, clearing his throat. "Hartwell, we'll need statements, but that can wait. Take your wife home, and—" He smiled slightly. "Blackwood won't be troubling you again. Seems he's wanted for similar schemes in Colorado. He'll be their problem now." The ride home was quiet. Clara tucked against Elias's side on the wagon seat. As their cabin came into view, she said, "I'm scared too, terrified. Every day I wonder if this baby will survive. If I'm strong enough, then we'll be scared together," Elias said. "But we won't let fear make our choices." He helped her down from the wagon, his hands gentle on her waist. "Stay, Clara, stay, and let's face whatever comes, side by side. No more treating me like I might break?" "I'll try, but—" He placed his hand over hers on her belly. "You're carrying our future, our hope. It's hard not to want to protect that with everything I have. Then protect it with joy." Clara said, "With laughter and plans and dreams. This child should know parents who dared to hope, not ones who lived in fear." That night, they lay entwined in their bed, the crisis having stripped away the last barriers between them. Elias told her about the town rallying to help, how even people who'd barely spoken to him since the fire had answered his call. "You're not alone anymore," Clara said. "Neither of us is—" "No," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Though I think I prefer it when you try to leave by talking to me first, not sneaking off to be kidnapped by corrupt bankers." "Despite everything," Clara laughed. "I'll keep that in mind for next time." "No, next time," Elias said firmly. "You're stuck with me now." "Clara Hartwell, for better or worse, I choose better," she said, turning to kiss him properly. "From now on, we choose better." As they drifted toward sleep, the baby moved for the first time, a flutter like bird wings that made them both freeze in wonder. "Did you feel that?" Clara breathed. "Yes." Elias's voice was thick with emotion. "Our child says hello." "Hello, little one," Clara whispered. "You're already so loved." Outside, spring continued its slow transformation of the mountain landscape. Inside, two hearts beat as one, choosing hope over fear, trust over terror, and love, always love, over the shadows of the past. The first snow of winter fell as Clara's labor began, soft flakes drifting past the frosted windows like a benediction. She'd been restless all morning, pacing the small cabin despite her heavy belly, arranging and rearranging the baby clothes they'd prepared. "You're going to wear a groove in the floor," Elias said from where he was repairing a harness, but his eyes followed her with concern. Clara paused, hand pressed to her back, as another wave of tightness crossed her abdomen. She'd been having these pains since dawn, but hadn't wanted to worry him. Not yet, not until she was sure. Then her water broke, sudden and undeniable, and Elias was beside her in an instant. "It's time." His face had gone pale beneath his tan. "It's time," Clara confirmed, gripping his hand as another contraction rolled through her. They'd prepared as best they could. Mrs. Morrison from town had agreed to come when needed, and Elias had already sent young Tommy racing through the snow to fetch her, but Clara knew it would be at least 2 hours before help arrived. "Let's get you comfortable," Elias said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. He helped her to their bed, now equipped with clean linens saved for this moment. Clara had attended enough births to know what lay ahead, but experiencing it herself was different. Each contraction was a force of nature, powerful and overwhelming. "Talk to me," she gasped between pains. "Distract me." Elias sat beside her, holding her hand, his thumb stroking over her knuckles. "Did I ever tell you about the first time I saw Mary? She stepped off the stage in town, wearing a green dress and looking terrified, but trying to hide it. I thought she was the bravest woman I'd ever seen." He paused, meeting Clara's eyes. "Until I met you." Clara squeezed his hand as another contraction built. "Tell me more." So he talked, his voice a lifeline through the rising pain. He told her about building their first cabin, about Jacob taking his first steps, about dreams for the future, their child learning to ride, helping with chores, growing strong and free in this wild land. Mrs. Morrison arrived as the snow began falling harder, bustling in with the efficiency of a woman who delivered half the county. "How long between pains?" she asked, shedding her snow-covered cloak. 5 minutes, maybe less," Elias answered when Clara couldn't. The midwife examined Clara with gentle hands. "You're doing fine, dear. Baby's positioned well. Won't be long now." But not long stretched into hours. The snow piled higher outside as Clara labored, her strength flagging as night deepened. Elias never left her side, supporting her when she needed to walk, rubbing her back, whispering encouragement when she cried out that she couldn't do this. "You can," he said fiercely. "You're the strongest person I know. Our baby needs you to be strong just a little longer." As midnight approached, Clara felt the overwhelming urge to push. "Mrs. Morrison positioned herself, calm and competent. "When the next pain comes, you bear down. Dear Elias, support her shoulders." The next hour was a blur of effort and pain and determination. Clara pushed with everything she had, drawing on reserves she didn't know existed. Elias was her anchor, his presence steady and sure. Then, between one heartbeat and the next, their child entered the world with a cry that filled the small cabin. Strong, indignant, alive. "It's a girl," Mrs. Morrison announced, quickly cleaning the baby and wrapping her in the soft blanket Clara had sewn. "A healthy, perfect little girl." She placed the baby on Clara's chest, and the world narrowed to this moment. Their daughter's first breath, her tiny fingers, the shock of dark hair like her father's. Elias made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, touching the baby's head with trembling fingers. "She's beautiful. She's perfect. Clara, You did it! Clara was crying too, overwhelmed by relief and joy, and a love so fierce it took her breath. We did it, she corrected. Hello, little one. We've been waiting for you. The baby settled against Clara's skin, her cries quieting to small huffs. In the candlelight, Clara could see Elias's face transformed by wonder. The harsh lines softened. Years of grief giving way to hope. What shall we call her? Clara asked softly. Elias was quiet for a long moment. Grace, he said finally. For the grace that brought you to me. For the grace of second chances. Grace Hartwell, Clara murmured. It's perfect. Mrs. Morrison finished tending to Clara, then quietly began preparing tea and food. You both need nourishment, she said, and I'll stay the night, just to be sure all stays well. As dawn broke, painting the snow-covered world in shades of pink and gold, Clara dozed with Grace at her breast while Elias kept watch. He couldn't seem to stop looking at them, as if they might vanish if he turned away. No more fear, Clara said sleepily, catching his expression. No fear, he agreed. Only gratitude, only love. The winter that followed was unlike any they'd known. The cabin that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with Grace's cries and coos and, eventually, laughter. Clara recovered well, growing stronger each day, while Elias threw himself into providing for his family with renewed purpose. They decided to leave Wyoming as spring arrived, not from defeat but from choice. The land held too many ghosts, and they wanted Grace to grow up somewhere fresh. They sold the property, not to Blackwood, who was serving time in Colorado, but to a young couple just starting out, full of dreams. Where shall we go? Clara asked as they packed their few belongings. West, Elias said. Oregon, maybe. Somewhere with good soil and less snow. Somewhere we can build something lasting. They traveled slowly, mindful of Grace's needs. In a small town in Oregon's Willamette Valley, they found what they were looking for, a modest farm for sale, with a sound house and fertile fields. The community welcomed them warmly, and Clara's skills with a needle soon had her taking in sewing work, while Elias established himself as a capable horseman. One evening, as spring rain pattered on their new roof, Clara found Elias in the barn, working on a rocking horse for Grace. She won't be able to use that for years, Clara said, amused. I know. He looked up, sawdust in his hair. But I want her to have everything. Everything I couldn't give. He stopped, shaking his head. Clara went to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. She has what matters most. Parents who love her, a home built on hope instead of fear, a future full of possibility. Are you happy, Clara? He asked quietly. Truly. She thought of the journey that had brought them here, the loneliness, the pain, the slow building of trust and love. I've never been happier, she said honestly. You? He turned in her arms, cupping her face. I spent so long just surviving. I'd forgotten what living felt like. You reminded me. You and Grace gave me back my life. From the house came the sound of Grace waking from her nap, her babbling calls bringing smiles to both their faces. She's found her voice. Clara laughed. Like her mother, Elias said, stealing a quick kiss before they went to their daughter. Years later, they'd establish a riding school for local children, sharing their love of horses with the next generation. Grace would grow strong and fearless, surrounded by love and laughter. She'd never know hunger or cold, or the kind of loneliness her parents had endured. And sometimes, on winter evenings when snow fell soft outside their warm home, Clara and Elias would remember that drafty cabin in Wyoming where two broken souls had found each other. They'd hold hands across the dinner table, surrounded by the family they'd built. Grace and, eventually, her two brothers, and marvel at the journey that had brought them here. I only wanted someone to tend my wounds, Elias would say, his eyes warm with love and memory. And I only wanted a place to hide. Clara would reply, but they'd found so much more. They'd found healing in each other's arms, hope in each other's eyes, and a love that turned the harsh frontier winter into the beginning of their forever spring. In the end, That's what the West gave them. Not gold or easy fortune, but the space to rebuild, the chance to choose love over fear, and the proof that sometimes the greatest adventures begin when two hearts decide to brave the wilderness together. Thank you for listening to this story of love, loss, and redemption in the American frontier. Where are you enjoying this tale from? Please leave a comment below to let us know. We'd love to connect with listeners from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Clara and Elias's journey. Your stories and reflections make our community richer.